Right. Although last week it occurs to me we're supposed to be doing this the whole point of this book is truly great women from the past becoming through the sand through time great women of the present. And I didn't tell you about a great woman. We learned last week about Rachav or Rochav, depending on your pronunciation, and how absolutely determined she was. She saw the truth, nobody else saw the truth, and she was not budging. And that's what she says to the spies. I know that I might lose my life over this, but I know Hashem is the real deal. That's not the exact translation, but you get the idea. I want to tell you a story that is matim, that is a perfect, not quite a perfect match, but a very good match for that. I used to live in a place called Long Island till 3.5 months ago. In the Five Towns, the famous Five Towns there, and in a place called Inwood. And I do speak all over the place, and there's an organisation which deals with Bukharian Jews. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with Bukharian Jews. That's the last real big national group of Jews who discovered their Jewishness again. It's quite remarkable. They came literally about 40 years ago to the United States with zero pennies. Unfortunately, there were other Jews waiting to steal whatever they had, sadly, and many stories like that. But now they're one of the richest communities. 40 years, half a century, less than half a century, one of the richest communities in Europe, which is quite astonishing. Now, I don't want to say anything bad about any Jew. But you know, of course, that there are certain types of Jew who have got certain qualities, but we all have qualities and we all have chesronos as well. For example, take Chassidim. I have a cousin who is a Belzer Chassid, and he says to me, just because a Belzer Chassid writes in his daughter's wedding invitation, starts promptly at 7 o'clock, does not necessarily mean that it has to start promptly at 9 o'clock. So Chassidim, of course, are famous for not coming in time, and Yekis are famous for being exactly on time. And there's the really awful joke about what do you do if you cross a Chassid with a Yeki, you get the Mashiach who arrives on time. That sort of terrible joke. Well, I have to tell you that even though Chassidim are renowned for their lack of Yekishkeit, they are nothing compared to Bukharians. They're a mixture of Soviet and Sephardi. And every time I've spoken for Bukharians, because I'm British, as you probably noticed, I always turn up on time, except when they're digging up the roads as they're doing today. Basically, I arrived at an invitation for Bukharian Jews, which was very special. So this is the story. This organization that works with Bukharian Jews had managed to get together something in the region of 300, I seem to remember, young Bukharian Jews, because it's actually tragic to watch. And I said the whole Jewish American story is now being replayed in miniature through the Bukharian community. So they came from the Soviet Union, they knew nothing, and then they come to America. But they're Sephardim, and Sephardim are usually very, very strong in their identity. And yet, even within those 40 years that I started to speak about, the intermarriage statistics for Bukharian Jews is actually becoming very significant, and that upset them a lot. And now they're building their own yeshivas, and they're doing their own outreach with their own community, so that the classic story of America, the melting pot, and or the dissolving pot might be a better way to put it, that happened to so many Jews from previous waves would not happen to them. So they'd got these 300 Jews, and they wanted to take them away for a super duper Shabbos, and the deal was that if they agreed to try and keep Shabbat for the first time properly, there was something like $200 or $300 as a reward. Okay, I wanted to go on the trip, but anyway, so basically they did that, and so the rabbi in charge of the group phoned up and said that he wanted to do a follow-up 3 or 4 days later, so that momentum and that enthusiasm shouldn't be dissipated. And so he said, would I come and speak to them? And this was on a Wednesday night in Queens. And I said, of course. And I said, what time is it? I should have known. He said, 7 o'clock. Rubenstein arrives at 6:45. Nobody else is there. It was meant to be a Chinese kosher meal as well. Attractive, right? But the caterer hadn't arrived. So I stood there waiting for, apart from 15 minutes. I'm not going to hold the 15 minutes early that I came against them. But an hour and a half later, still nobody was there. Macarian Jews are like that. You just have to once you get the vibe, as they say, you're okay. But if you don't get the vibe, oh, you basically. Anyway, so in came the rabbi. Oh, shalom, Rav Rubenstein. Hi. You're here. Yes, I'm here. Too British to say anything. Yes, I'm here. I said, okay, the caterer's just coming. Half an hour later, the caterer came. That's 2 hours. Still no kids. So eventually the kids arrive, and of course their main priority is the Chinese kosher meal, which I'm not blaming them for. I quite wanted to do this as well, but never mind. So half an hour after that, then we're going to start. But then he came up to me and said, do you mind if somebody speaks before you?
Oh, no.
Right. Thank you. Do you mind if somebody... And of course, being British, I said, not at all. What I meant was, are you kidding me? Anyway, so this young lady stood up there, and she's called Rose. And Rose started to tell them her own story. She said, I believe you kept Shabbat 3 days ago or 4 days ago for the first time. Last Shabbat was my 14th Shabbat in a row that I've kept. Oh, they all burst into the fire. Fantastic. And she told her story, which was one of the most exciting stories I think I've ever heard. So basically, she stood up and she said, I have to tell you, when I first started to keep Shabbat, I didn't find it easy. It was definitely not easy. In particular because she comes from a family in Long Island where only she was keeping Shabbat, but her 3 siblings, Saturday is where you do stuff day. You go to the malls, you do sports, or whatever. And the whole house is buzzing, and phones are ringing, and cars are arriving, cars are driving away. And she found it very, very difficult indeed. So she got in touch with her family in a group session, and she said, look, you've got to help me keep Shabbat. Which is astonishing, because, in fact, you would imagine they want to help her not keep Shabbat. Our daughter's gone crazy. It was this nonsense. You've got to help me keep Shabbat. So I'd like you to play games. It's a very long afternoon on your own, where all this noise is going on. I'd like you to play games with me. Monopoly or whatever on Shabbat afternoon. So they must be a really remarkable family, so they agreed that they would do this. Phones were put away or shut off or whatever. And in fact, they played games with her for 2 hours every Shabbat, which was really, really nice. The father and mother's ambition for their daughter was that she should become a dentist. I don't know why, but, So, but, it would give her a good parnassa, and it's always a good thing for a girl to have a parnassa anyway. And so basically, she had been enrolled to do a year's pre-dentistry course at a university in Queens called St. John's University. But the real Holy Grail, that's obviously the wrong theology there, but here, what's another word to frame this in? I was going to say the Mecca, that's definitely wrong. But the ideal place to go to get a degree in dentistry is Columbia Dental School. Apparently Columbia is the Spitz. Use Yiddish. The Spitz is to get to Columbia. And to get in there is almost impossible. So they get something like 1,000 applications every year. Only 200 get to interview, and then I can't remember, maybe it's 100 or whatever. It's very, very small because it's elite. And she had managed to get herself an interview at Columbia. The father was through the roof with pleasure. Wow, this is an ambition for his daughter. And off she went to have the interview, and it turned out to be the professor in charge of the whole school. So, you know how these interviews go. If you're really not up to snuff, as they say where I come from, if you're really up to standard, then basically what happens is they sort of say, very nice meeting you, have a nice day, and you're done. But in this case, he sat talking to her for 15 minutes. That's a very, very good sign. And after he'd asked her, peppered her with all the questions, he said, well, Rose, I'm extremely impressed with your dedication to dentistry. I don't know if you could have such a thing, but your dedication to dentistry and the fact that you're doing this course at St. John's University, pre-dentistry. I'm not allowed to make any offers at this stage of the process, but I think I can tell you that, well, you see, I give a weekly lecture in the main lecture hall here, tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. I think I can assure you that if I see you in my lecture, you have a place in our dental school. And her face lit up. I mean, wow, she's going to share this with the parents. They're going to be going crazy with pleasure and joy. And then it struck her. Shabbat. So what is she going to do? So she said to the professor, who obviously was Jewish, Professor, I'm an observant Jew. And tomorrow's our Sabbath, Shabbat, etc. I don't think I can make it. So he just looked at her and in the exact same words said, all I can tell you is that if I see you tomorrow in my lecture at 10 o'clock, you have a place in our dental school. And that was that. So off she went, came home. No, say the parents. She tells the story. The father jumps off the seat and he's dancing with her, he's hugging her, he's kissing her, and the mother's getting involved. Well, that's a big, big thing. And then when they all calmed down, she said, Dad, I don't think I can go. He said, what? What do you mean you can't go? Well, tomorrow's Shabbos. Honey, this is your career. I know, Dad, but I don't. Look, speak to God. I'm sure he'll understand that this is your career. This is what you've worked for your entire life. And she said, Dad, I don't think it works like that. He says, look, sweetheart, Mom and I set aside some money for, in case you didn't get into Columbia, to start the process again and whatever the next best dental school is in America. I'll give you that money. And you can use that money for any charity, any one of your Jewish charities that you want. But please, sweetheart, don't miss this opportunity. He said, Dad, I don't think I can do it. And then he activated the last weapon in the armory of any parent trying to guilt trip their children. Did you know what it was? No. Get out's not guilt. Get out's no. That would be a big mistake. That's good. I'll have a heart attack. I'll die.
We'll fake a heart attack.
Honey, if you're not going to do it for you,
do it for her.
Oh, see, you do know it. Then do it for us. I said, Dad, I can't do it. And she didn't do it. On Sunday morning, Rose was, I think it's called buyer's regret. She was riven with guilt. Her parents are devastated. They see her as being incredibly ungrateful. And anyway, not only is she being having the guilt trip from the parents, on top of that, she's also having the Yetzer Hara working overtime on her. You've been friend for 14 weeks. Yeah? How do you know you couldn't have gone on Shabbat? Maybe you could have booked a taxi. It would have taken you, a non-Jewish driver, and he could have been sitting outside waiting for you to get back in. Who says you couldn't do it? Yeah. What do you know about Shabbos, etc.? And she was being bombarded with guilt and doubt on all sides. So she decided to phone up her Rebbetzin, a lady who had been helping her for the last 2 years to take incremental step after incremental step, till she would get to the stage where, as it were, Shabbat was being kept. And she phoned her, and she's literally crying her eyes out. And she's crying her eyes out, and she's saying, it's stupid, and I didn't know, and I should have asked you. And so the Rebbetzin said, look, Rose, we've been learning for 2 years, and we've covered this. Everybody gets tests in life. Everybody gets an assignment in life. And this, I'm not arguing, this was a big test. But you passed the test. Don't feel regret because you passed the test. I don't know. Look, you've passed this test. Put it behind you. You did the right thing. Meanwhile, in the conversation, all the way through the conversation, somebody's trying to get through on her phone. Right? You know how that happens, right? And it's just driving her mad. She said, "Look, Rebbe, I'll phone you back. Somebody's driving me crazy. I'm just going to take this call." So she switched calls, and she actually took out her phone because it was recorded, and she played it to the 300 kids, and the voice said, "Test, test, test. This is a test. This is St. John's University, security office. This is a test. Test, test, test. This is a test," and just kept repeating it. Because when you're a student at university, you have to, they have to have all your details. Particularly in America, and we hear these cases all the time, when there are attacks by lunatics on students, whether little kids or old kids, that if there were to be a security threat on the campus, then all their phones, a bit like we get here when there's a missile alert, they all go off, and it's a recorded message, that is, instead of test, 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 it'd be, this is a real thing, there's an armed person on campus, etc. But what did the message say? What did the representative just say? Test. This is a test. God sent you a test, and you've passed the test. Takes the call. Test, test, test. This is a test. Rose got the message. She saw it was a test, and that was that. Now, at this point, people always say to me, "Did you get into Columbia Dental?"
Well, why was she on the list on the phone if she didn't get in?
No, it's St. John's University.
Oh, the other
one that she was there. So I always said, I don't know. However, I now do know, because 2 years ago I was giving an online Zoom Shiur to a group of young girls from part of an organisation called Olami, and I told this story. And one of the girls, when you're giving a large group and Zooming, they've seen that everybody's a postage stamp. Because a screen full of little postage stamps, and there's one of the postage stamps is jumping up and down. She's my roommate. Rose is here. Rose is here. So basically, Rose appeared on the screen. I said, I hope I didn't embarrass you, Rose. I'm just telling your story, but you're in my book. She said, yeah, because I asked her permission to be in the book. I said, no, did you get in? Yes, she got into Columbia. Wow. So there you are. So some people just do not budge, but of course, if you don't budge and you pass the test, then you can get the award. You can get the degree. Her degree is going to be, whatever it is for dentistry, but also somebody with Emunah and B'tochen and Hashem. Beautiful story. Okay, thought it would be nice. That's that one. Good. Now, I want to talk about Miriam, and we're going to see some fantastic stuff here. I'm also going to talk a little bit about music, as you will see. And so, our first port of call is one of my great heroes, Reb Shamshon Raphael Hirsch. Reb Shamshon Raphael Hirsch says a very interesting, he's got this theory that time and Hashem's creation of the world is progressive. And the further you move forward in time, then you're moving towards better stuff. Ultimately, the coming of Mashiach, the world will be full of peace and shalom and all this stuff. So basically, in the creation story, he starts off with inanimate objects, stars and planets, and then eventually gets to animates, grass, and then animals, and then the spitz, the pinnacle, is of course human beings. But what human being did he make first? The first human being was the male, or the male and female in one body, which gets to be a bit confusing. And then Hashem takes the female aspect, the part of him. Hashem Hirsch incidentally says, this thing about the rib. He denies that that's the translation of it. But whatever, he takes that aspect, the female aspect, from Adam, makes her a completely individual human being. And therefore, consequently, if his theory is right, what is her Madrega compared to his? So he says, he was made from the earth, but she was made from him. So God creates something special, a human being from the earth. But now there's a second human being. In a real sense, Adam Rishon was a practice run, an essay in the craft. The real final version is going to be the woman, Chava. And that's exactly what he says. And if you've ever done stuff, I remember, I think I told you I used to broadcast a lot on BBC Radio. National radio is huge in the UK, unlike the United States. People get all the news from the radio, and I used to be on that all the time. And then recording programs, either TV or radio. So I was basically on some sort of BBC screen for at least once a week. And when I was doing pre-recordings, very seldom is the first take perfect. I used to do this from New York for the BBC. You look over your screen, your script rather, and you're ready to go. And then I say, okay, a green light comes on. You start the recording. Either you fluff it, you stammer over a word. But in the reading it, even though you've practiced a million times before you get to the studio, when you're sitting there in front of the microphone, in front of an audience of perhaps 156 million, if it's live, or that's BBC World Service, or if it's being recorded, you find stuff that could be better. The second take basically is almost always better, or the third or the fourth, because you've ironed out all the little problems. Essentially, that's what he's saying here. That Odom Mauritian was the first take, but the second take, the better take, that was Chava. And this is exactly the theme that we've been pursuing all the way through in the previous weeks, that women are naturally, or have a natural advantage over men, which you'll find it in the book, etc. You see this again when it comes to the Yam Suf. When it comes to the Yam Suf, we all know the story, and then Klal Yisrael goes through. And then there is a moment of Nevi'us. And Moshe Rabbeinu sings perhaps the greatest song of all in Jewish history. The song of Moshe's Song of the Sea. All is Yashim Moshe. And when he says these words, it's prophetic. Right? Hashem's putting the words into his mouth. And then the men all repeat those words. Right? Oz Yashim Moshe, and they all sang, I think there must have been a tune as well, but it was a cappella. It was a cappella. But there's another song. That was the first take. But the second take was Miriam's. Miriam's and the woman. In the second take, Miriam and the woman stand there, but it's not a cappella. The women bring out their musical instruments. Now, a cappella, I don't know if you're into music, but a cappella is very, very beautiful. And particularly for people who find the 3 weeks difficult, and certainly between Pesach and Shavuos, find the whole idea of not listening to music hard, then of course an easy solution is a cappella, because it's only when, and this is the halacha, that it's accompanied by musical instruments, is it really, that's the zenith of happiness and rejoicing, etc., etc. And therefore, as it's only a cappella, you can get away with that. But that means music completes the whole process. So the women go out and they have their musical instruments, and Miriam sings a song, because what Moshe is to the men, Miriam is to the woman. As I've said to you many times before, if you're going to succeed as a Jew, if you're going to succeed as in anything, you need a teacher. But if you're going to succeed as a Jew, you certainly need a teacher. But it has to be the teacher gets you and you get the teacher. And that is, as you are all women, or as we ultra-Orthodox Jews say, non-men, as you are all non-men, then by definition you need a non-man, another woman, to be able to be your guide. Because women will be able to see things from a woman's perspective where no man would ever be able to do. And Moshe dealt with the men. Ditto, he gets men. But it's interesting to note that in that role, as Miriam, as the leader of the woman of Klal Yisrael, which is the Iker, if you remember, I think our first or second shiur in that one, then that means to say, when she's standing there in front of them, they're all immediately, an orchestra forms. And whatever the various tupim and all sorts of instruments, there's also a debate as to exactly what these instruments were. But it has to be by definition that however they sang that song, it was a much better version, a much better take than the men's version of the song. Whether we're doing it from Rav Shamshin and Paul Hirsch's, it's a progression from it, so therefore they can add new bits or see new things. Or just generally because music is something special. So I want to just emphasize that point and take you to one of my great teachers was somebody called Ramatasiel Solomon. And Ramatasiel Solomon wrote an essay which is absolutely, gave a shiur, which I was actually a bit embarrassed about this when I saw him. I just read this. It's called Zamru Maskil. Zamru Maskilus. These are words which we say in our prayers, but Zamru means to sing, or to have music. Maskil leads you to understanding. Which is an interesting title for this. I'll just quickly give you the introduction. It's on the story of Purim. Now you remember when Achashverosh has his party, the purpose of the party is what? Well, it's a celebration of the fact that the prediction that the Jewish people are going to be able to go back and rebuild the temple after 70 years seems to have failed miserably. It was a miscalculation on their point, but that was the celebration. Now, in the ancient world, it was the case, and you can find this in you don't need Jewish sources for this, just historical sources will tell you this. When two armies went out to fight each other in the ancient world, not only did they believe that their soldiers were fighting the other guy's soldiers, the other team, but they thought that their gods were fighting the other gods. Consequently, if you lost, that meant that the other guys, the other nation, had better gods than you in the first place. You were an idiot for worshipping your gods who've just been defeated. They were therefore second-class gods. You should have been worshipping Zeus in the first place. And when the Zeusniks, the Greeks, were beaten by the Romans, then it must be Jupiter. He's the big deal. So automatically, as soon as these situations occurred, the losing team just quite happily embraced the beliefs of the winning team, became Romans, became Greeks, etc., and abandoned their old gods, although the Romans were clever enough to take the old gods and make them minor deities in their temples, but their gods were the big gods. So therefore, when the Persians beat us and destroyed our temple at the beginning, the Babylonians, which became the Persians, and when they did that, they fully expected us to say, wow, that's it. Let's go and become Babylonians and worship whatever their god was. Can't remember his name, George or something. And worship George. But they didn't do that. Stubborn Jews. What a pain in the neck the Jews are. But I know why they're not doing it, because one of their prophets said that after 70 years, this defeat will be reversed and they'll go back and rebuild their temple. Easy peasy. So when 70 years had elapsed, according to their calculations, and God had not rebuilt the temple, that's a proof that now they're going to see sense and worship George. And the Jews still didn't. So this whole party thing was to get the Jews to fully embrace the Babylonian stuff. And you remember there was all sorts of things that were going on in the party to accelerate this. So first of all, this is a very interesting thing. All the elements, all the basic elements of cognizance of a human being were catered to. So there was food for taste. Then the garden was draped in beautiful coloured drapes and stuff, and that was sight. It was out in the garden, so lots of beautiful flowers, and that was smell. And then there was touch. And touch was catered to by the fact they sat in solid gold chairs. Now, I don't know if you've ever held a bar of gold in your hand. Gold is a remarkable metal. I was once lecturing in South Africa and they sent me down a gold mine. I think they liked the lectures. It wasn't because, but they sent me down a gold mine, see actually gold being mined, and I came back up, and then there was a whole thing about it, the whole history of gold and how it worked. And there was a guy who had a huge kiln, and he took a pot of molten gold, and he poured it into a mould. It was about that size, if I can use your phone, about that size. And then as soon as he poured it in, and he took the mould off, he then went and picked it up with his hands. And we all went, ah! But it was gold. It cools down instantly. And as you know, from Tutankhamun and various discoveries, as one they discovered just recently, the gold sarcophagi they had in Egypt were shiny 3,000 or 4,000 years after they were made, when they were discovered, as they were in the day when they were made. Gold never tarnishes. So gold is a remarkable, it's very, very thick, remarkable metal, and of course it's used for in medicine as well. So basically, the gold, so all of the senses are being catered to. But a remarkable thing at this party was one sense was not dealt with. Music. There was no music at the party. It's hard to imagine in almost any society that you're not going to have music at a party. So why not? So the answer is like this. This is the short version. The Ramban says, there is nothing in this world which is almost kula kedusha, almost totally holy as music. And Achashverosh didn't have music there because he was scared. Instead of awakening within them all sorts of base, all sorts of negative desires, and indeed there were apparently a whole group of, forgive me, prostitutes there ready that this would turn into some sort of orgy and the Jews would be seduced and do all sorts of things that were disastrous for us. But if there was music played, then music, instead of being a catalyst and awakening negative things, it could have the exact opposite effect. And, can I just point out, they wouldn't have been playing Mordechai ben David, right? It would have been probably Arabi type music and stuff like that. But still, music has that ability. So, Romanticio says the following thing. This is absolutely, this will blow your socks off. Shamati ben Zokan Echad, I heard from one great Talmud Chacham, She'omar al pi divrei haradak. He was quoting the Radak. Lo novin kapitel tehillim. Now, of course, one of the greatest musicians of all time was a rabbi. He was called David HaMelech. And he composed songs, as we know, right? We call them psalms. Lo novin kapitel tehillim. You will be unable to fully understand what he means unless you know the music that he wrote to go to the Tehillim. So, of course, particularly as we're in a women's group, I mean, women specialize in saying Tehillim. But if you want to get to the ultimate level of what it's all about, you would have to know what the music is, which we have, for the moment, lost. But not only that. Not only that, you'd have to know what parts he wrote for those particular instruments. Because there's many instruments they wrote for. Many times in Psalms it says this is for the lyre or this is for the harp. If you knew the music, if we knew what the music was, somebody discovers, wow, well preserved in the cave, the actual music for the Psalms, but we didn't know which instrument played that. So you give the lyre's part to the harp and the violin part to something else, you're still not fully able to understand where it is. If you know how music works, says the Vilna Gaon, you can even bring people back from the dead. I don't know how to do that. But obviously, let's go back to what we said before. The men's Nevi'us was expressed a cappella. But the woman's music was expressed with musical accompaniment, with musical instruments. That's, again, second take. That's a far higher madriga. That's a far higher level altogether. And of course, in a practical sense, it's easy to point out that the women took their musical instruments. The men, another more practical reason why the men didn't have musical instruments to join them, because they didn't bring them. But the women brought them because they were absolutely convinced they were going to need them. Because the Emunah, the betochen, the trust that women have in Hashem is consistently in a higher madriga than men. And so we come to Miriam. So Miriam occupies the role of Moshe Rabbeinu for the women, and it's a higher level, full stop. End of stuff. Okay. Now, let's talk about Yocheved for a second. How old was her mum when she got born? Anybody know? How old was Yocheved when she was born? Yocheved was 120.
Miriam?
120. When she gave birth to Miriam, she was 120 years of age. That's quite old. I mean, so, some people are looking absolutely appalled here. Just in case anybody is pining for the days when you were getting up in the middle of the night to change diapers, etc., etc. Don't give up hope. Now, that obviously is something which supersedes that of Sarah Emunah. Sorry, Miriam was a mere piddling 90 when she gave birth to Yitzchak. But Yocheved was 120 when she gave birth to Miriam. And this is meant to tell you how exceptional Miriam was. She starts off from, okay, it's okay. Fine. I thought I was to be turned up, actually. I can't hear you at the back. The Miriam was exceptional in so many ways. So I'd like to read a little bit from this book here that I wrote. Anyways, good. So Rashi says the following thing. He talks about the difference between the men and the woman, and then Reb Pinchas Scheinberg, who's a tzaddik Brachon, who I had the great privilege of knowing a little bit. The men did not bring incense with them. Clearly, their level of belief and trust in Hashem did not reach the level of that of the woman. Regarding this, Reb Chaim Pinchas Scheinberg says, quoting the Aruch, why are women on a higher level when it comes to Emunah than men? Emunah itself is a feminine word. Did you ever note that? Emunah is in the feminine. It's a feminine word. In other words, it's yours. You're woman. This is your word. It is something innate to women. In a way, it's not innate to men. Astonishing thing. Now, Miriam's birth itself points to the fact that a unique soul had come to the world. I say she's 124, sorry. I said 120. Everybody does that. 124 as the Rambam, a much greater miracle than Sarah giving birth. Fine. No. We all know this story, and maybe it's troubled you. The king of Egypt has decided that it's time to deal with these Jews once and for all, and so we're all enslaved. 5 years after the enslavement process, he comes up with another idea, and that is we're going to throw all the boys into the Nile, and they're all going to die. Why did they kill them that particular way? They're going to kill them that way in order to stop Moshe Rabbeinu, because they saw through their Kabbalistic mystical powers that there was going to be a boy born who was going to save the Jewish people. But his undoing would be through water, hitting the rock. Okay, they didn't see that the exact, but that was that. That's why they killed him through water. That would be fulfilling that sort of prophecy. And who was the first person to prophesy that there was going to be a boy born to save the Jewish people? Miriam, when she was how old? 5 years of age. Okay. So therefore, what happens is, he then comes and he says to them, right, he told them two things. You are going to be able to see whether the woman is carrying a boy or a girl. And he was able to show them, don't know how it works, some way that is an indication that it's a male pregnancy. And then you just simply, and when you deliver the child, you simply put your hand around the neck, and the baby will die, but you'll say it was a stillbirth, but really you will kill them. Okay. Now there's the Torah says that he spoke to them and says that bit, you're going to, the boys will be killed at birth. But it also says he spoke to them before. What did he speak to them about before? And the Medrash says, he said, you're going to be called Shifra and you're going to be called Pua. The person that gave the name Shifra and Pua to Yocheved and Miriam was Parai. Seems very, very strange. So again, this is a bit I want to read to you. So somebody called Shiur Faber says that the first thing he said to the midwives was, from now on, Yocheved and Miriam would be called Shifra and Pua. These were Egyptian names, and titles bestowed on them by Paro as a reward for what he fully expected would be their loyalty and obedience to the king in carrying out his orders. So he promoted them. You're now Lady Pua. They come from England, you'll get this stuff, right? Lady Pua and lady whatever it is. Now what's that? Then the Orchaim says what they did was, of course they weren't going to do this, but they simply said to him, I mean, how does this work? Why are their boys still being built? You didn't do what I'm telling you. Off with their head. They said there was a leak. The plan got out. The Jewish women were. Remember, Rashi says they're quick. They deliver too quickly. What it meant is they know that we're coming and they know that we're supposed to kill them. Somebody leaked the plan, and that's how they got out of this. But here's a very, very interesting idea. I don't know if you've come across this. It's something which is historically very sad, but very, very often, and incidentally, I had this experience not too long ago with an ex-university student of mine who had been promoted to be a Lord in the House of Lords in England, left-wing Labour supporter, wealthy fellow, now a Lord, and like in America, and I saw a hint of it here as well, the secular forces are desperate to change the education system. And then it's something called Ofsted in England, who's monitoring all sorts of things that are going on in Jewish schools, and they want us to teach their current morals, which from our point of view are appalling, and the Jewish schools are resisting this. So I was part of the campaign to fight back, and I got in touch with my ex-Talmud, Lord such and such. I think they're doing a good job, he said. He'd become completely and totally seduced by being a Lord. Did I ever tell you about me being the new Chief Rabbi of England? And this is really very funny. After Lord Sachs passed away, there was a selection process for the new Chief Rabbi, and with 600 very deluded individuals who got together on Facebook to start a Facebook group. Rabbi Y.Y. Rubenstein should be the new Chief Rabbi of England. I don't think so. I mean, to be the Chief Rabbi of England, you have to be, like most rabbis, you have to be tactful, and diplomatic. And those words don't really go together with Y.Y. Rubenstein. Anyway, so basically, this was a process, and I have to tell you that Chief Rabbis of England come in for quite a lot of criticism. Rightly or wrongly, I'm not going to go into all that, but I thought to myself, if I was idiot enough to become the Chief Rabbi of England, the person that I am, the person that I've striven to be, what would be left of the Y.Y. Rubenstein that who's been on a certain path and trajectory for all of his life, when you're mixing with lords and ladies and prime ministers and presidents? The thing is, when you're mixing with lords and ladies and prime ministers and stuff like that, you end up married to them. And we know, again, back to the to Megillah Esther, we know that at the end of the process, Mordecai, who was the head of the Sanhedrin, was demoted. Because if you're dealing with other stuff and other people, it does have an effect on you. My late wife, Elea Shalom, she was very wise when I told you all that media stuff that I did before. She was quite happy with me getting involved with radio. But TV, she was very, very scared about. That's a very seductive, corrupt world. So she limited what I was getting involved in. You can be corrupted by it. So has anybody here ever heard of somebody called Rabbi Avraham Shiur? No. Okay, so that's going to be very interesting. Rabbi Avraham Shiur, we all know about the Abarbanel. In 1492, Americans will finish this one for me, when Columbus sailed the ocean blue, two other things happened in Spain. Spain became a united kingdom. I come from the United Kingdom of Scotland, England, Wales, and Northern Ireland. 4 kingdoms joined together to make a new polity. In America, the 50 states joined together to make a country, the United States. This is a united kingdom. Spain, until 1492, was not what we call Spain today. It was different little countries. The Ramban did not live in Spain. There was no Spain when he lived. He lived in that country called Aragon, with the capital of Barcelona. So in 1492, Spain became a united country. In 1492, oceans was traversed by Columbus discovering America. And it was also when Ferdinand and Isabella, your Catholic majesties, kicked the Jews out of Spain. Everybody knows that the Abarbanel, who his job, incidentally, he was a member of the royal household. He was what's known as a tax farmer, and it was his job to bring in revenue for the crown. There was another partner of his, great rabbi, like him, like the Abarbanel we all heard of, except he's not heard of this man. He's called Rabbi Avraham Shiur. So let me read this to you. I met somebody when I was doing a Pesach program a number of years ago for Gateways, and he asked me, "Have you heard of Rabbi Avraham Shiur?" I said, "No." Well, he's my wife's great-great-great-great-grandfather. So that's very, very nice. And he was in a campaign to re-establish him as a kosher Jew. Listen to this. Like the Abarbanel, he'd done much to make Spain rich. Oh, incidentally, this guy, Avram Senior, was the shadchan of Ferdinand and Isabella. And in the last toehold that the Muslims had in Spain, he raised the money, most of it his own, to raise an army that eventually kicked the Muslims out of Spain. Okay, interesting man. Okay, both had managed taxes and wealth of the country, making it rich. As an old man of 80, Rabbi Senior, he was given a choice. You can go out. Incidentally, Barbanel was given the same choice. You can stay. After all, you're one of these super rich Jews that can make us rich. You can stay. Oh, of course, you've got to convert to Christianity. The Barbanel, whose father did, in Portugal, it was one of these, pretend conversions, but he was always couldn't deal with this. It was difficult for him. He refused point blank and led the Jews out. But Rabbi Senior became a Christian. Just think of somebody on that level. He became a Christian. Rabbi Senior chose a different path to that. The Barbanel converted to Christianity, taking the name Fernando Pérez Coronel Núñez. As a reward, he was given Spanish noble names, Spanish titles, etc., etc. Now, I have to tell you, this boy had done, this great-great-great-grandson, had done some research. This is an interesting halakhic question. I discussed this with Rabbi Wein, who wrote about him and said this quite critically. I said, there's new research out, and I showed it to him, this is many years ago, that when they summoned him in front of the king and the queen to express their hakaras tov for making their shidduch and for freeing their country from the Muslims, it was you've got to convert to Christianity or you're out of here. No, it wasn't. What would you answer to this? You've got to convert to Christianity, or we're not going to expel the Jews, we're going to kill them all. That was the choice. Now, incidentally, you can visit Rabbi Senior's house now in Spain. I have. There's a secret synagogue that he built in the basement. So you can, I think, reasonably assume it wasn't much of a sincere conversion to Christianity. So why did he do it in the first place?
To save the masses.
To save everybody else. That becomes a totally different kettle of fish, does it not? So basically, it's not unknown in Jewish history for Jews actually to welcome and embrace reaching the highest levels of non-Jewish society. Lord Rubinstein, the Viscount of Rubinstein of Glasgow, etc. But of course, you're going to at least compromise your religious standards in so doing. And that was exactly the proposition that Miriam and Yocheved were made by Paro. You're going to be Lady Pua, Lady Shifra, and of course they weren't interested in that. But there is historical perspective all the way through up until our own times when Jews see whatever the garbage out there is fashionable, and you see this in America happening now, when Jewish Hamas supporters, but it makes you popular for what? And willing to do such a thing. So of course they were not willing to do that, and that's how this ended. But it was Miriam who then goes on and says to her father, now he's the Gadol Hador, right? So Amram, Moshe's father, when he sees what's happening to the boys, of course, what's his response? What does he do? He divorces his wife. If they're not living together, there won't be any children conceived. What's the point of bringing children into the world when the boys are going to be killed? So he says, your decree is worse than that of Paro. Paro only decreed against the boys. You're decreeing against the boys and the girls. Because when the greatest rabbi of the generation divorced his wife, they all followed suit. They all divorced their wives. Consequently, there were no children being born. Paro was at least going to keep the women alive, and the reason he wanted to keep the women alive, as you probably know, is because they hoped to have their children by these Jewish women. The Jewish women were pretty, certainly in comparison to the Egyptians who are apparently of that generation, particularly ugly people. And so she, of course, is not interested in this process at all. And remember, Mitzrayim is the blueprint, the template for all exiles. Everything we found in this exile, the ones before, there were elements of it in Mitzrayim as well. Okay, she turns around and says to her father, your decree is worse than that of Paro's. And notice the greatest rabbi of the generation, his reaction to his daughter, who's a little girl, 5, still 5, so who says this to him? A chutzpah, talking to your tata that way. Poof. Not at all. He says, you're right. Remarries his wife, her mother, and of course produces a boy, one Moshe, Esquire, as did they all. But what was what was her motivation in doing this? The astonishing thing is, first of all, to bring Moshe. But when she does this, and when she says this, already, forget about being 5. She's not a 5-year-old girl like you and I understand 5-year-old girls. The women get this in a way that the men don't. And so what happens is, the women, you all know this bit, the women went out into the fields, delivered their babies under trees for shade, I suppose. Apple trees, I think it was. What's the apple trees? Apple trees, etc. And when the Egyptians came to get them, God intervened. And the miracle happens. And the earth opens up, or just the earth covers them. They can't see them. No, maybe they were just there. The Egyptians couldn't see them. It doesn't matter. And then what happened to these children? So when we came back to the Red Sea, remember it says, Ze Keli V'Anvehu, this is my God. Who was the ones who pointed and said, Ze Keli V'Anvehu? These were these boys. They said, they could see, it's a whole prophetic, that's the one who saved us. God took projected some sort of physical form to look after these children and looked after them. So here's a sefer called Leket Sichos Musar by Isaac Sher, who was the Rosh Yeshiva of Slobodka. I have to tell you, I've never read this to an audience and not burst into tears. Maybe. I just find this deeply moving. Listen to this. I'm going to read the whole thing in Hebrew. Kivin shagi zman moladehem holochas v'yeledes besodi tachas et buach. So when it came time for the women to give birth to their children, they went into the fields under these apple trees, etc. Ubolo etzav beloi kol chevli leda, and they gave birth to the children without any physical pain whatsoever. V'yeledes besodi tachas et buach belo etzav v'niach shoma sheshel yilodim. And of course, how many children did they have each birth? 6. So taking shares in diaper companies in those days would have been a very good move. Okay. Then they turned around and said to Hashem, I think I told you once when there was a plane crash. Did I tell you about that? I remember when we were coming in for the crash line, we had lost the front wheels in takeoff, and it was during Elul. I remember saying to Hashem, I was getting very upset at my 2 little girls growing up not knowing who their daddy was. But I remember turning around and saying, okay, if you're going to take me, fair enough. But I will be nifter. Nifter means, what's the word nifter? From the word potter, exempt from keeping mitzvahs. That's why we don't say somebody's died, we say he's been nifter, or she's been nifter, nifteris. Exempt from keeping mitzvahs. Okay, in that case, one of the mitzvahs is bringing up my little girls. You'll have to do it. I remember saying that. You'll have to bring them up. If you're taking me away, so I can't do it, then you'll have to do it. And that gave me a lot of menucha. It wasn't being chutzpahdik. That's okay. So the woman, having given birth to these 6 little boys, then turns out, I've done my bit. Now you'll have to do it. They came, and she went back to her house as though nothing had happened. Right? No pain in childbirth, therefore no convalescence afterwards. And years passed, and these children were lost. So let's get to this bit. And then it says the following thing. Then, maybe 10 years or so later, they would come back to their house, having been brought up by Hashem. They went back to the house, in various groups. And they came to their parents' house. Now you can imagine Rahman, the son, a woman lost a child or had a stillbirth. And suddenly you find out that you didn't lose a child at all. And somebody looks after them, and this is your child. So the child comes back and says, can you imagine the simcha of discovering they're alive? And remember, 6 at each birth. So you get maybe 50 or 100 sons coming in. hope you got a big house. Yofim boim kol mumen, they're handsome and strong, etc. Besimcha Ranan, singing and dancing. Kemincha na'ara karim alma ima. This is against me. Mom, Hashalom, how have you been? Adagalani, were you worried about us? Where's our daddy? We want to see him. Avihim bomi asodi, and the father would come in from working hard in the field, and maybe find his sons there. That's what happened. And she and they had betochen that we will do it, even if we don't know what's going to happen. Women start, as Pinchas Scheinberg says, women start with Emunah. It's a female word. And the leader of the woman of Klal Yisrael in the critical generation of Klal Yisrael, which is Mitzrayim, was Miriam. It was Miriam that said, no, don't divorce. Bring them into the world. And Hashem says, oh wow, that level of betochen, that level of Emunah, that deserves a really special reward. She was on the highest level of Emunah possible because she started as a woman. And she is plan B according to Rav Shamshon and Paul Hirsch. She is the second take. Women are the second take. And the song that they sang reached by definition, according to what we read in Ramatziah's Sefer, reached an insight, a level of insight and understanding through music with musical instruments, and only that level could come through musical instruments, which was denied to men. It's a good thing to be a woman. And if, unfortunately, you're not, make sure you marry one.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.